Quick test. Sorry, I'm a teacher, I can't help it. Quick test. Who here was once a child? Hands up. Come on, I don't want to put you in the naughty corner. Who has children? So everyone has an experience where they understand what it was like to be a child or what it's like being responsible for a child. I am a teacher and I love being a teacher, but I didn't become a teacher because I love teaching, if you catch my drift. I love being a teacher because I love learning. And I'm sure all of you who are learners, who are parents, who are looking at their inner child, sorry to use that phrase, you are listening right now, and I want you to actually listen a little bit more intently about who you were and what you can learn from this experience. The concept of never too old to learn and never too young to teach came about through a process with my students, where I'd been talking to them about a number of technologies in the classroom. And it wasn't until we had this moment that we then came up with this concept. So I thank them for that. First and foremost, I must acknowledge the Indigenous people of this country, and that it's a privilege to be here. I was born in Cairns, down the road at Base Hospital, and so I'm connected to this place. My family was also connected to this place as well in a number of ways. The process of acknowledging country is important to allow us to have that connection and importance to know who you are and where you are. So I acknowledge the elders who are also with us today. Knowing where you're from is just as important of knowing where you're going. So as part of the story today, I want to share a couple of past stories. I don't want you to think about just the students or the children in your present, in a way in your presence in the present. I want you to think about the children that have been before you. So I'm going to share a couple of stories about my family. And the reason I do that as an Aboriginal man is that it's important for us to acknowledge what they didn't have access to. So one of the images I would love to show you is of my great-grandmother. Her name was Janie Gordon. Now, Janie Gordon was born at the latter part of the 18th century. And what happened with Janie Gordon is a remarkable story. So I have to acknowledge certain people that found the records that told the story of Janie Gordon as my great-grandmother. What happened to Janie Gordon? She appeared on the doorstep of the Christensen family. All right, the Christensen family, and this is my great-grandmother, Janie Gordon, they noticed her and they saw that she was obviously not well, and they took her in. Now we have to remember that this was a period of time where the Aboriginal Act just came into effect in Queensland. And if you're not familiar with the Aboriginal Act in Australia, it started in Queensland and it went throughout the whole of all of the states and territories. It was a way of making sure Indigenous people were also looked after by the government, to make them have that responsibility. But it also was a very controlling mechanism. And as you saw from other speakers, my deadly brother David, there was a way of getting out from under the Act. So Janie Gordon, because she wasn't her own entity, and her mother was in hospital, she was just living in a fringe camp at the age of 5. The Christensen family found her and she came up to their house, so they took her in. The remarkable thing is that family weren't able to actually adopt her. There was no adoption laws. So they had to pay £1 to the person who was looking after her to then have her as a servant, in a sense. So at the age of 5, she wasn't considered an adopted family member. She was legally represented as a servant. Now, the Christensen family were amazing. They looked after her, they cared for her. And as with most of the early settlers in North Queensland region, if they had the money to, instead of enduring the long, dry or wet sometimes summers, they went back to England. The Christensen family, Mary Sr. and Mary Jr., took my Granny Janie back. And just that moment of knowing that my great-grandmother was the first to actually, in my family, leave Australia. Okay, that's a significant moment for an Indigenous person to say, well, who was the first in our family that actually left Australia? She suffered through one winter, and the doctor there, and she was loving school, apparently, according to all of the records of the Christensen family and their letters. She suffered through school as well. She loved it, but she was getting very sick. Her lungs could not cope with it. And so they actually had to send her home. They sent her home alone. They wanted to go back with her. They couldn't, so they sent her on the Duke of Sutherland, and she actually went back with the stewardess on the ship that looked after her for those 5 long weeks from England back to Queensland. She was then sent to one of the worst missions in Queensland on Fraser Island, and it was in a mosquito-ridden swamp, and a lot of children died in that place, but she survived, and she was sent to Palm Island, and she was sent to Yarrabah, and then sent back to Palm Island. And just an amazing story. She did not have a voice. And if I had access to her voice right now, then I'd tell you what she learnt, so I could actually learn it. But listening to her story, and I keep thinking about how important it is to remember her. This is the family history. Tyndale, Norman Tyndale, went through Queensland, Australia, and wrote these down. And I'll share the link between Tyndale and Max Lenoy soon. And he wrote down all of these genealogies, and you see that Granny Janie is in the centre there and married to Ockie Lenoy. Ockie Lenoy's dad is, if those in Cairns know of Lenoy House, which is in the middle of Lake Street, 92 Lake Street. I also want to share on my dad's side. This is Harry Mossman, found in Mossman, at the age of 5, was arrested and sentenced to 7 years. There is a court case that shows Harry versus the police, and you can read it. I want to acknowledge the wonderful people behind this story as well, and what they did. Kathleen Denigan wrote the story, and I acknowledge her and her work. Harry Mossman then was not allowed to leave Yarrabah. His mother, Topsy, in Mossman, wrote letters to the Protector asking to have her son back, and it makes me, and I want you to look at the eyes of my great-grandfather. See the emptiness in his eyes. He was finally allowed to live in Cairns at the age of 50. He was released after 45 years of requesting to have leave. So I want to know what the story he had as a child, and how would that make you feel if you had to suffer that. He married my great-grandmother, Mary, and her story is also equally as amazing. As a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, half-caste in those days, she was sent to Yarrabah, and she had to suffer those endless questions about her identity. Look into the eyes of my great-grandmother. I want you to see the hollowness on how their childhood was taken away. Her children were sent to the dormitory. My grandmother used to share stories of growing up in the dormitory, and how they weren't even allowed to pick up the mangoes that fell rotten onto the grass, or else they'd get beaten. That they used to fight for that one bone that was in the soup, and then whoever got the bone would run out to the rock and smash it and eat the marrow, and had to fight off all the other kids. This is the childhood that they had. So that's important for me to acknowledge, that they are the children that I'm listening to. And I want you to do the same. This is the timeline of Harry. It says when he was born, that he was arrested. The police actually, in there, it was interesting, the police officer said, Harry, who was very well cared for and well dressed, was neglected. And so that was an interesting statement that the police said. So that gives a timeline, and that he was free for 20 years of his 69 years. That's the story of a child that I want to know more about, and I'm keen to find out more. And this is theirs. My grandmother, Enid Rose, is on the bottom left-hand corner from your vision. I want to also tell my story as a proud son of a mother who, as a child, always told me I could do whatever I want. My mum was not allowed to go to high school. In those days, you weren't allowed as an Aboriginal child. And so she always used to tell us, when you finish your education, I'm going back to do mine. When you finish doing what you want to do, I'm going back to do mine. I always say my mum was the best father or mother I could ever have, and my sister and I owe everything to her. So I had an amazing journey. When I remember at 14, she woke me up, I heard her crying, and she said, I have to let you go. That I have to let you go, and you've got to make your own decisions. So at 14, I was out, no pocket money, I had to go and clean toilets, and I was mowing grass and everything else, because that was what my mum said. She needed to let me go. I had to make my own decisions. And I then made these decisions and ended up going to this little college called Harvard University. And there's a long story of that happening as well. But when my mum came over, they told me adamantly, your mum is not allowed to go on stage, Max. never. And I said, you don't know the story of my mum. She's coming on stage. So it was wonderful to hear, and it still rings in my ear, Max Lenoy and his mom. So, and true to form, and we crack up every time. Every photo I have of my mother, her eyes are closed. So thanks, Mom, for staying true to form. And she was just whisked away. I saw her probably 2 nights out of about 10 that she stayed there because everyone just adopted her. So I honour my mum and her story. Being not allowed to become the doctor she wanted to, she held true to her promise. And when my sister and I finished our studies, or we were interested in finishing our studies, she went back and became a librarian, because she loved to read. And thank goodness that JCU employed her as a librarian. She's now retired. So I acknowledge my mum and the way she actually raised me to actually keep seeking. So her story and what it was like for her as a kid to be told, no, you can't go any further in school because you're Aboriginal. That has changed my perception on how we need to look and listen to children. The other role I have, which I'm very proud of, I say I'm a full-time dad and partner, and in my spare time I work. Because for me, there's no greater responsibility. Now, I have one daughter. Who has one child? Who's got more than one child? I don't know how you do it. I'm serious. I'm not saying that she's a huge burden. I'm saying I love investing time and energy into her, and I don't know how you do it if you've got more than one child. And I'm really happy that she's done amazing things. She is someone who I learn constantly from. This is when she was around 4 years old. I want to share with you the story of how she taught me something really important. So I was having a bit of a nap on a Sunday afternoon on the couch. We were living in Perth at the time. And so I was relaxing and enjoying my break. And then I get this, Dad. And so I jump up. What's wrong? And it's my daughter. And she says, Dad, is this bad? And then she went and headbutted me right in the forehead. And of course my reaction was, yes! So this is kind of the alter ego. This is her when she's done several plays, but this is the first one. She was a lost child in Peter Pan. And so, and I asked myself, what did I actually learn from that experience? It's true, it might be funny. Step back is the main thing when you ask the question from a child. But in stepping back, that's also one of the principles I was taught. Give the child space to express themselves. You never know, it might be a physical question. Yes? So I learnt that. A number of other times, even recently, I just learned I have to learn to actually give space. And my daughter is a very amazing child, not only because what she achieves, but what she actually thinks. This is her, they won the Nationals, Queensland North won the National, first time ever. And she was in the team. That's not a younger sister, that's my wife. All right, on her side. Once we were doing fundraising, washing cars, and someone gave her the money and said, have a great trip down to Tassie. So, my amazing wife, who's a Torres Strait Islander, and I honour her as well as a partner. We just stepped out of the way. That's what I mean by stepping back. I think the best way to learn from children is to get to their level, taught wonderfully by my wonderful professor, Nola Alloway, get down to their level, ask them open-ended questions, and then get out of the way. This old Greek guy, who was a philosopher, he said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Now, I don't know if you know much about Aboriginal language, but there's evidence, clear evidence. Terry Casares, one of the most amazing linguists I know in Australia, she demonstrated that Aboriginal people have 26 times more silence in meetings. I see my black brothers and sisters shaking their heads, yes. 26 times more silence in meetings. Formal meetings, these are formal meetings, these are informal meetings, 26 times more silence. Silence is a form of communication that we need to practice more of. We need to actually listen more than we actually speak. So I want you to practice that, all right? Don't just stand in front of someone and stay silent. No, actively listening, actively paying attention, asking open-ended questions. I now pose you this question, how do we learn from children? How do we actually put this in place and actually practice it? I have an amazing group of students. This is the prep professors. Everyone say prep professors. Prep professors. Come on, say it together. All right, now say it 20 times. No. I have been teaching about technology and how kids use technology for 20 years. All right, I remember the old internet. I now know how kids are using it, but it was not possible to show my students without engaging students into the space. And so with the wonderful principal at Heatley Primary School, Louise Wilkinson, we invited the prep students into our space. And this is what they did. They showed our students how they use technology. They blew them away. We had people from all over the university coming to learn from the prep professors. We had the teachers. This young girl had 7 people around her, and she was having 7 of these little laptops. Yes, do this now. Yes, now you do this. Okay, well, you do this. I want you to come back and see me. Her teachers were saying, she's never talked like this. And I'm getting goosebumps. You know, it was a moment of seeing all of these wonderful kids who had to teach someone. And as you know, the literature says, how do you know you've learned something? By teaching it. I love that Einstein quote. You know, if I can't explain it to a 6-year-old, then I don't know it myself. All right? That is what these kids did. They were actually teaching adults. And they were in charge of the actual learning. And that's why it's valuable. All right? That's why it's powerful. Listen to a child in your life. Listen to what stories they have. They are going to be the ones running the future. So why don't we learn from them? I want you now to close your eyes, if you could, please. I want you to imagine a world that does not have the sound of children in it. I want you to think of that space in your home at Christmas time, at a celebration of family, what it doesn't sound like. What would it sound like if there was no children there? I want you to imagine that lack of feeling if you didn't have children in that space. Having them hold your hand, having them jump on your shoulder, or wanting a piggyback, or put me on your shoulders, Dad. I want you to think of how that felt to have that contact with a wonderful young identity. And I want you then to also think about how you would feel yourself without them present in your life. Before you move anywhere further, think about it. You're never too young to learn, and you're never too old to also teach them. Thank you.